All right, directors, when I call your name.
On my mic too.
Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Macaulay for Burris.
Here.
Desmond.
Here.
Jones. Absent. Nicely.
Here.
Zaragoza.
Here.
Schaefer.
Here.
Soon. Absent. Thomas. Absent. Vega.
Here.
Vice Chair Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Chair Gallardo.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is our opportunity for public communication, and this is an opportunity for anyone to address the committee on an item that is not on our agenda. And Mr. Cook, I believe we have one
We
speaker
do,
card.
yes, David Schwiegel from North America for High Speed Rail. And David,
Thank
you'll
you.
have 3
Mr.
minutes to
Siegel,
speak.
yeah, 3 minutes.
All
and
right.
Please join us.
Thank you. Good morning, SACOG Policy and Innovation Committee. My name is David Schwegel with North America for True High Speed Rail, inviting a deep dive into high speed rail as a potential tool for innovation. High speed rail is about bringing people together, as I indicate in the book that I'm working on, High Speed Rail, Bringing People Together, to foster face-to-face communication and meetings. The goal is to generate enough seed money for a high-speed rail summit and advocacy day next May. And the way I see such a summit unfolding is having a family day at the California State Railroad Museum, as well as a banquet. And then the next day being the actual summit with educational sessions at the Sacramento Convention Center, followed by an actual advocacy day at the Capitol and the surrounding areas, because we're not sure when exactly the Capitol is going to be completed. So look for announcements about a high-speed rail summit and advocacy day sometime next May. In closing, these are exciting times for high-speed rail. First off, Brightline West from Los Angeles to Las Vegas has an aggressive goal of being up and running by the time the Summer Olympics come to LA in 2028. And I hear that Brightline is very optimistic about being able to meet that timeline, as they've met similar timelines in Florida. California held an exhibit at the Expo Center at the California State Fair back in July. I was there, very impressive exhibit. And finally, Cascadia High Speed Rail up in the Pacific Northwest has some amazing talking points. For example, one high-speed rail line in Cascadia would carry the passenger equivalent of a 12-lane freeway with airports at either end and generate a staggering $355 billion in economic returns. So keep an eye on high-speed rail, and we continue to advocate aggressively for Merced to Sacramento, bringing that up to the top of the food chain. More than likely, that's going to be built by the Ultimate Corridor Express, or it will be built by Brightline West. But it doesn't look like
1 minute remaining.
okay. But it doesn't look like California is interested in moving Merced to Sacramento up to the top of the food chain. The key reason why Merced to Sacramento is so important is that that generates ridership revenue that is absolutely essential to fund construction of high-speed rail over the Tehachapi and San Gabriel Mountains into Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwagel. Any other public comment?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, thank you then. We'll move on, and then we have a new housekeeping item, as we recall, and this is our opportunity for any disclosures for any director to disclose a conflict of interest for any item on the agenda. All right, seeing none, thank you. Then we will move on to our consent calendar, and these are items intended to be approved by one motion. Is there any item on here anyone would like to remove for further discussion? The minutes, thank you. Director Nisely is abstaining for the minutes.
Madam Chair, Zaragoza moves consent.
Daniel Calvillo, second. Sorry.
Thank you. Before we vote, is there any member of the public that wanted to remove an item from the consent calendar?
There's no one that wanted to remove item or make a public comment.
Thank you. And everyone's here, so we can do it. We don't need to do a roll call vote, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right. So this is our first action item, so we will go with item number 5, and it's a request for a proposal for Transportation Development Act triennial performance audits. And Carolyn Payne from our SACOG staff will be our presenter. Welcome.
Good morning, members of the committee. Caroline Payne, one of your staff members here. Today, staff is requesting a release for proposal to hire a consultant to conduct Transportation Development Act annual performance audit of SACOG and the transit operators to which it gives TDA funds. The budget for this exercise is not to exceed $255,000. 255,000. So the ask for this committee is that it recommends to the board that the executive director releases this request for proposal for the audits to negotiate, award, and execute the contracts with the selected consultant. Briefly, the triennial performance audits are conducted every 3 years, and the benefit is to provide independent, objective, and comprehensive review of SACOG and its transit operators. It also gives management an opportunity to see the programs that they have engaged in, the activities and opportunities to improve in the future. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from directors? All right, seeing none, is there, Mr. Clerk, is there any questions from the public?
There's no public comment.
Thank you. Then I will look for a motion.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the staff recommendation as proposed.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
And motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our next action item is item number 6, approval of financial ERP system contract renewal. And Loretta Sue will be our presenter. Thank you.
Good morning, Loretta Sue. This item is seeking board approval to renew the financial ERP system contract for additional 5 years for a total of 10 years, and also to delegate to the executive directors to negotiate and to execute a contract agreement not to exceed a total amount of $955,414. Back in November 2019, SACOG procured and entered into a 5-year master subscription agreement with Spark Rock USA for a financial ERP system, also known as Spark Rock 365, which will expire by end of October this year. Since 2020, staff have utilized the system for processing accounting and payroll transactions, managing and tracking employees' records and benefits, and also for financial reporting. Extending the master subscription agreement for the Spark Rock 365 for additional 5 years is consistent with SACOG procurement manual. And it's also to avoid disruptions of the day-to-day operations. And also this will provide real-time access to financial information. In August 2023, the board approved the revisions to SACOG procurement manual to include procurement of software products for a total of 10 years. This is to prevent disruption of the day-to-day operations and also costs associated with the implementation and training associated with the new software. The Spark Rock 365 is a customized ERP system, so it would be a huge undertaking for staff to implement a new system, and it also will be costly. With the integration of the Spark Rock 365 with the most recent implementation of the Crestica budgeting software, it allows real-time access of budget to actual information and to improve reportings, and also to improve transparency and accountability of SACOG managed funds, all the different fund sources. Therefore, staff is recommending extending the Spark Rock contract for additional 5 years for a total of 10 years in the amount of approximately $468,000. This will result in a total contract amount of $955,414 for a total of 10 years services. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Sue?
I just have a
Dr.
comment.
Schaefer?
It's kind of impressive to me. We, in Citrus Heights, we just purchased our new ERP system we're currently developing. Try to get a straight answer on how long an ERP system, what's the expected life for an ERP system, but not get a straight answer. It says 10 years. That sounds reasonable. When we are approaching 2029, what is what are the steps that we will seek at that time? And maybe we can extend this beyond 2029 if we're doing updates along the way. So I think this is pretty well laid out. It's actually less money, quite a bit less money than Citrus Heights. It costs Citrus Heights to put this in. I think we're about 1.2 million. So I just wanted to say kudos. It looks like a really good deal.
Thank you.
Shelby Faria.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll
No,
open
I
up-
I just have a comment. I remember this back when we did the one in 2019. I just thought, wow, it's such a niche business. So you don't have a lot of other,
Vendors, yeah.
vendors out there to do some of this. And it does, I mean, this is a good price. And, hopefully if it works well, we'll be able to, maybe go beyond the lifespan of it as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair Saragosa.
Madam Chair, just a real quick question. How many employees do we have with SICOG?
We have approximately 60 employees.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Not, I'll open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment on this item.
Then I will come back and look for a motion, please.
Madam Chair, I'll move the item.
A second.
Thank you. You got it, right? With that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Good, thank you.
Madam Chair, as you, you bring your next speakers up, if I could just actually connect the dots on a few items this morning. You had Caroline talk a little bit about the triennial audits that are coming up. And I know this committee sees all these things. And I just want to give a lot of credit to our staff team. We've had clean audits on multiple funding sources. And I'm sure not unlike your local government, so much of what we do here is touch a variety of sources of funds. So that's one. I'm actually going to ask Eric Johnson if you end relatively on time towards the end. And I'll just hit on the receive and file item on the budget, the closeout of last fiscal year, because there's some good news on that. And then we're going to be bringing to you as well the first ever kind of looking forward multiple years over kind of our budget and projections. So all of those things are enabled by a lot of the things Loretta and her team have actually been able to put in place, like the SparkRock and ERP and other systems where we have a much more fine grained now look into our budgeting, our expenses. So more to come on this. Appreciate your support for that last item. I just wanted to connect you to a few other things that you'll be seeing at the end of this meeting, but also in a couple of months to come. So thanks again.
Thank you. Well, we are moving on to our, I think I'm on. I hope they can hear me. We're moving on to our first information item. I don't know, are you guys hearing? Try it that better. I like this green light better. Moving on to our first information item, item number 7. It's the advocacy update and AB 350 revisit. And Renee DeVere Oki will be our presenter. And then we will also be joined by other SACOG staff and Chris Lee from political groups. So we will start with Renee.
All right, good morning. Renee DeVere. I'm part of your government affairs staff. So this is an information item today with a little bit of a longer discussion. So about 45 minutes on the agenda for this. And we have Chris Lee, as well as Kiana Valentine here for Political Group to provide us an update about what's happening across the street, as well as walk us through our historical legislation that we did last year on AB 350 and potential avenues ahead. But before I hand it off to Kiana for the Sacramento update, I just wanted to do a quick update about what's happening on the federal side. Please see attachment A. There is a report from our federal lobbyists, Capital Transportation Consulting and Pavlicek and Associates. Noted in the report, the House and Senate over the summer have both passed their own versions of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act, otherwise known as THUD. It's a lot easier to say. So THUD is important because it provides significant funding for various transportation programs. One of the programs that we've been paying particular attention to that's folded in this act is what we've heard as YIMBY or PRO. This is one that we've discussed as a competitive funding stream for Green Means Go in the future, and one that we're looking to apply for this coming year. So the House version of the bill did not include YIMBY, whereas the Senate did, and there are some notable differences in funding allocations as well as priorities that are in the two. But there's a lot of work ahead because they have to come together and kind of merge these two and come to resolution. So that'll be happening over the next few months. But since the elections are obviously in full swing, it's most likely that we're going to be looking at some extending the existing appropriations bill to keep funding going as we head towards November. So take a look at the attachment A if you're interested in more details. There's also a couple of federal programs that are competitively available there. And if you're interested in more, go ahead and reach out to me and I can help connect you and find more details on those. So unless there's any questions on the federal side, I am going to hand it off to Kiana here.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, directors. Kiana Valentine with Politico Group. I'm going to attempt to cover 3 months worth of political, state budget, and policy updates in about 5 minutes so we can set aside a majority of our time for the AB 350 discussion. But because it's been a few months since we met, we wanted to make sure to hit on some of those high notes that have occurred, mostly reporting on some positive, successful outcomes. Mainly, the state budget was wrapped up in July, and due in large part to SACOG, member agency, and other regional agency advocacy, are pleased to report that the proposed $300 million reduction to the regional housing Regional Early Action Planning Grant Program was reduced to a total of $40 million in reductions, $10 million of which is going to be absorbed by the Housing and Community Development Department. So a total of $30 million hit versus $300 million, really successful outcome. So quick moment to take a victory lap on that one. It was a great team effort and something we were really pleased to be a part of. I can tell you that the Green Means Go program and what you all have been doing was one of the most critical talking points and convincing arguments to retain those dollars, that you are actually building infrastructure projects that is going to unlock land for housing development, infill housing development, connecting people to jobs, transit, bike walking, all of those things, delivering on your greenhouse gas reductions goals was significant. So wanted to make sure to highlight that. Also, since we met in June, the legislature has wrapped up its business mostly for the year, slight asterisk there. The regular 2-year 2023-24 session has concluded for the year. There is a special session, which we'll talk about briefly, that has been called. But there are several bills that we want to highlight for you that are on its way to the governor's desk. The first of which is AB 3093 by Assemblymember Ward. Let me just say there's a 14-page memo that details everything I'm talking about. So if you have questions or want even further details, there is more information in that memo. This was the administration's proposal to create 2 new income categories for your RHNA process, specifically extremely low income households, which is based on 30% below of AMI or area medium income, and then acutely low income households with incomes of 15% AMI. My colleague Chris Lee was the lead on that measure for SACOG's advocacy, and reports that there were some amendments regional governments were seeking that were adopted in various amendments to the bill, including an August 19th version, which requires HCD to publish advisory guidance to be used by each Council of Governments on distributing that those 2 new income categories. So that's on its way to the governor's desk. A couple of other bills we wanted to highlight. 2 measures we have not talked about either before because they were sort of last minute gut and amends, or that they were stagnant for the past year and sort of came back to life in the last few weeks of session. AB 98 by Assemblymember Carrillo and Reyes is related to warehousing and citation of warehousing facilities and the movement of freight throughout communities. It would prescribe statewide development standards for new or expanded logistics facilities, and has some other requirements for SACOG member cities and counties related to circulation elements, doing community outreach, and potentially changing where trucks could drive throughout your community. There was not time to really engage in terms of advocacy on this bill because it was amended in the last week of session. However, we already understand there are conversations about cleanup next year and some additional changes that the authors have committed to working with local governments on. So that one is on its way to the governor's desk. Finally, I will just mention SB 768 by Senator Caballero would require the Department of Housing and Community Development to do a VMT related study, specifically how SB 743 or the VMT metric now included in CEQA is having impacts on housing projects. And so it's unclear to us at this time what the governor's office may do with that. I'm probably already out of my 5 minutes, so let me just mention self-contained 5 minutes, so I guess I can give myself more time. After months of negotiations between the administration and the legislature on potential changes to various energy policies related to residential energy use to gasoline prices, the Houses and the Newsom administration were unable to come to an agreement in the remaining days of session on a majority of proposed energy-related measures. 3 bills are on their way to the governor's desk, but the governor was unsatisfied with the legislature's lack of taking up and passing other measures, particularly a bill that would require oil refineries to create reserves and do other things. And so he immediately called them back into special session. As of this morning, it seems like both houses are participating in the special session. The Senate was sort of pushing back because they were ready to take action in the final days, but have since sort of acquiesced, saying, you know, if the Assembly takes action on a package and wants to send the Senate something, the Senate will come back in and engage with the rest of the legislature and the administration on that. So more to come. Finally, as you all know, there is an election upcoming in November with several state-related measures on the ballot. 3 we wanted to highlight for you. Again, the memo goes into more detail. The legislature did ultimately qualify and place on the ballot 2 general obligation bonds. Prop 2 is a $10 billion school facilities bond, and Prop 4 is a $10 billion climate bond, which encompasses a broad range of activities under the banner of climate. It's water, wildfire prevention, drought preparedness, and clean air related activities. And then finally, Proposition 5 is the outcome of many years of one of SACOG's legislative representatives, Assemblymember Aguilar Curry, attempting to reduce voter thresholds for local actions. As passed earlier in the year, the proposition would have reduced voter thresholds to 55% for both local sales tax measures and bonds. Unfortunately, there was negative polling, some pushback on the sales tax part of that. And so ACA 5, which qualified Proposition 5 to the ballot, was ultimately amended. That is a great ringtone. That is a great ringtone. Yeah. So as it is sitting on the November ballot, it would only reduce voter thresholds for locally qualified bonds at this point. I think we are seeing a variety of different polling data on what may or may not be successful in November, both in terms of the bonds and how voters may feel about reducing voter thresholds. And so since I'm not a betting person, I'm just gonna wait and see what the voters do with those initiatives in November. And with that, yeah, way more than 5 minutes, but still brief. Any questions on that?
Questions on the advocacy portion? All right, we'll see it then, but in addition to the advocacy presentation, we've asked Political to walk us through our potential options for the future Sustainable Community Strategy, our SCS updates. Our current plan, as you know, we had supported AB 350, but gave us an additional 2 years to finish the blueprint until 2025. It turns out it's 2025 is breathing down our neck. So and now we have to talk about what we're going to do. And I think great conversation came out of our strategic planning committee. And a part of it was we need to have many opportunities to look at this and come up with some answers. So the committee felt strongly we need to bring this back to all the groups. We'd like to have input on the pros and the cons. And we did bring forward 3 options. I think we feel like 2 of the options were actually probably the most realistic in there. So we will ask Political Group to walk us through the benefits and the risk, and we'll provide all 3 options and then get some directions. So if Chris and Kiana would walk us through that, thank you.
Great. Good morning, Chair Galdo. Chris Lee with Politico Group. We have slides here, so if we could flip to the first slide, it has an outline of the presentation. Oh, here we go. I will do it. So want to start with just a refresher of what happened with AB 350, where we are, why we need to revisit it so soon. And then next move on to potential next steps for legislation. And finally, want to leave a lot of time for discussion and questions from the committee. So the chair covered it pretty well, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically AB 350 gave us that additional 2 years as discussed. It aligned the Sustainable Community Strategy schedule update with MTC and got it a bit closer to San Joaquin COGS to improve mega regional coordination. And I understand from your staff that that has resulted in some better modeling, and especially as those gateways between the 2 regions. Stakeholders, the legislature, and SACOG, unfortunately, during that bill, could not agree on what the bill meant for the timing of the next housing element update in the SACOG region, so for the 7th cycle. Because remember, we were doing this at the SCS that was basically at the midpoint of your 8-year housing element cycle. And so the compromise to get out of that bind when we were in Senate Appropriations, and the Department of Housing and Community Development had a proposal, the Senate was concerned about that, stakeholders were divided, was to basically have a sunset. But it's not, although we argued with Legislative Council, it's not constructed like a typical sunset where it just says this section expires at X date. What the bill does is it resets the schedule. So we have the 2025 extension, and then there would be a requirement, unless we went back and changed the law, which we included intent language to say we want to continue to look at opportunities to align these planning processes across the Northern California mega region. But unless we go back and revisit that, the schedule is reset to 2027 and then every 4 years ongoing. Oops. All right. So to address this situation and the way the bill was finally passed, we've come up with 3 different options, as the chair discussed. So the first option would be to maintain that 2027 timeline in current law. So rather than having 4 years in between your plans as you typically do, we just have a 2-year window. So we would do 2027 and then 4 years ongoing. The second option would be to make the new schedule permanent. So the next SCS would be in 2029. So that requires legislation. You're going to move that out 2 years and then keep the housing element on the current 8-year cycle. And so the key difference with that one is, unlike traditional sort of order of operations, the housing element would precede the next SCS. The third option that we've discussed, and as the chair mentioned, we think is probably the least politically feasible, would be to make the new schedule permanent and resync the RHNA process. So keep the traditional order that these processes happen in. So the next SCS would be in 2029, and then the housing element would be due 18 months after the adoption of the SCS in 2031. So that would basically mean that the 6th cycle, which was planned to be a typical 8-year cycle, would actually be approximately 10-year cycle. And really the reason that we think this option is pretty unpalatable and politically difficult is, as you're all aware, the intense focus on housing and the housing element as a tool to, Kiana just discussed AB 3093 about extremely low and acutely low income planning thresholds. You'd be putting that off for 2 years. The administration is talking about that as a way, how can we get cities and counties more focused on homelessness, right? So the housing element has become such a, unwieldy, but very important to state policy tool. And we just worry that if we come and ask to extend that, the sort of concessions that might be asked of SACOG or its member jurisdictions are probably going to be things that are going to be tough for your jurisdictions to support. And then generally just want to say that the ideal timing for us to pursue each option is the beginning of this next 2-year legislative session. We don't want to be in a situation where we're over the barrel negotiating and have to have a bill that year. This is complicated stuff. It touches on core priorities of the state and the regions: housing, climate, affordability, the economy. So we want to give ourselves the full 2-year session and not have to be in a place where we can't take a pause. We want to have the option to, have a 2-year bill and give us some breathing room. So digging into these options a little bit more. So option 1, maintaining the current timeline. Key benefit of this approach is doesn't require legislation. This is, as we mentioned, the sunset in the bill isn't constructed as a sunset. It just said, this is what the schedule is after this date. So we don't have to go back to the legislature on this issue. It could just self-execute. The key risk of this approach are that CARB is beginning to work on updating greenhouse gas reduction targets for the SCSs. And so for that 2027 update, there's a chance that those new targets would be in place. And so that could be, in moving into the next point, put the region at a higher risk of having to need to adopt an alternative planning strategy if those targets are not achievable. There's 3 SB1 competitive grant programs that require consistency with SCS that reduces, if implemented, the greenhouse gas emissions to meet those targets. The Solutions for Congested Corridors program, which is a statutory requirement, that consistency. The Trade Corridors Enhancement Program, that's the program that SACOG, partnering with YTD and Caltrans, just pursued funding for the YOLO 80 Corridor project. That's also a statutory requirement. And then the Local Partnership Program. And this is one where it's not in the statute, but it is in the CTC program guidelines. So for your counties, and I think there may be some city-only measures in this region that have self-help measures, their ability to access the Local Partnership Program relies on the adoption of an SCS. So are there options to mitigate these risks? We do believe that there are transportation and regional stakeholders that would be likely to support legislation that revisits this broad prohibition of requiring projects to be in an SCS and the SCS to be found to reduce emissions if implemented. This was a provision that was, I think, added very late to SB1. There's a lot of different interpretations of why it's there. But I think what we're seeing across the state is regions are going to be close to broaching this threshold. And if you get to a situation where the largest urban regions of the state can't access some of the largest competitive transportation programs at all, not just for a certain type of projects, but you just can't apply, I think there's going to be at least some appetite in the legislature to revisit those prohibitions and think about the policy surrounding that. We don't necessarily think that that's something that SACOG would or should be the leader of, but we think participating in a coalition effort amongst all the stakeholders that care about this is something that could be an option available to mitigate those risks. Moving on to option 2, this is the extend the AB 350 timeline. So this is basically the option where we would push out the SCS to 2029, which would be consistent with the typical 4-year update. maintaining that alignment with MTC, getting closer to San Joaquin COG. And one of the reasons why we think this is more feasible than option 3, although both require legislation, is that this aligns with a recent recommendation that HCD came up with pursuant to legislative direction in 2019, to have the SCS increasingly driven by the housing planning. We've seen some kind of, let's just say wonky, but also like wonky in a awkward sense, legislation to just really strictly have these plans aligned in ways that are not workable. But we think this option would allow a planning process where the RENA really is at the forefront and then the SCS is aligned with it. That would be what would have to happen because the RENA would be happening before the SCS update. And we think this aligns with the recommendation in that HCD plan. What are the key risks of this approach? So obviously, anytime you're going into the legislature asking for something, concessions are likely. AB 350 included concessions related to basically oversight and accountability, some additional reporting requirements. But we don't know what those would be, right? We can make some educated guesses what they could be, but that's always a risk. Other regional agencies might be concerned with the precedent of this, right? Some of those bills, AB 1335 by Mr. Zabur, were very controversial with MPOs around the state because of trying to think through the really complicated implications for how you do your federal air quality conformity and other plans. So could other regions be concerned with the precedent of SACOG trying out this RENA-focused approach? Potentially. And then finally, SACOG may still need to adopt an APS if those updated CARB greenhouse gas reduction targets are not achievable with the same SB1 funding risks. So options to mitigate those risks, it really would be a pilot of this more RENA-driven approach to the SCS. It might actually take the pressure off of some statewide efforts to push through something like that. So that might be a way to make other regions less concerned. And then I think anytime we're going to go to the legislature as a regional agency, I think we want to work with our local stakeholders, whether it's in the transportation community, whether it's in labor, whether it's your home builders, affordable housing developers, housing advocacy groups, want to work with the regional stakeholders first to try to build consensus and support. So really to put the key risk side by side, option 1, this really is the earliest risk of an APS if the greenhouse gas targets are not achievable. We did want to point out that given the typical 2-year cycle of the SB1 competitive grants, so for instance, there's a call for projects right now for 2024. Those funding decisions will be made sometime in 2025. We anticipate the next cycle would be in 2026 with a call for projects in 2027. So really, even under this option 1 strategy of most likely adopting an APS in 2027, it wouldn't be until 2 cycles from now of SB1 grant funding programs where the region would actually be in a position where eligibility is affected. So there's time there. I think that's the key point we want to make there. But it still is the earliest risk versus 2029 would be, if you weren't at risk of an APS till 2029, you'd have 1 additional SB1 cycle where you're unlikely to face those eligibility concerns. So for option 2, it's new legislation and concessions. We don't know what the legislature or other stakeholders might want to see SACOG do for the benefit of being, on a different pathway than other MPOs under SB 375. As mentioned, we think there could be concerns from other regional stakeholders about changing the way we do this big regional plan. And then you still may need to adopt an APS. As mentioned, it could be later, but it's still a possibility we understand from your staff. And so the same SB1 competitive funding programs are at risk. So that's really the outline of what we wanted to kind of frame out for you. And we really are interested in hearing questions and discussion. And I think with that, I turn it over to staff, or I understand the committee might have some comments as well to kick off the discussion.
Thank you. As you can see, there's a reason we wanted to bring it back for as many opportunities to look at this. I will tell you just my input, and Chair Saragos probably could back that up. There really wasn't a clear consensus from strategic planning because we have so many unknowns on this that we're depending on others. So I've probably got a few, but I take this opportunity on it. Anything before we open it up for questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Exactly. I think, we probably spent over an hour talking about this at SBC, and, I think even after all that time, it was sort of clear as mud about which path we may want to take going forward. So we did think it was really important, bring it back to P&I, bring it back to the full board in the September meeting, so that we have at least 2 bites at the apple from this group, well, 3 for some of us, to really dig our teeth into this and to try to put forward what we think is the best path. Because either of these, there's risks, as Chris mentioned, for any of this. Obviously, we try to mitigate those as much as possible, and as a consensus, come to what we think is the best path forward for SACOG and for our respective jurisdictions. I have some thoughts on what I think might be that. I want to hear what everyone else wants to do or has questions, because it might elicit some other thoughts in my mind. And again, we brought all 3 because we wanted to show you what all 3 options are out there. But as Chris mentioned, option 3 is very risky because of the housers basically coming unglued if we try to push back the RENA cycle. It was already problematic when we had our first under AB 350. It's why we ended up kind of where we were. It's not likely if we revisited it again next year that it would be any different. And just to underline again, next year is really important, non-election year, first year of a 2-year cycle. It's our best opportunity to probably get something done. We go into 2026, whole new dynamics. There's a new governor's race coming into play. So there's just a lot of unknowns if we go into year 2. But that does give us, if we do try something doesn't work, we do have a 2-year cycle still. But preferably next year would be really the year, and that's why by October we want to be able to make a choice so that we can give our team a chance to go talk to the legislature and try to at least get things moving along. So that we can have something ready to go right when the new session reconvenes. So with that, I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork again, or the ground again for everybody, because this is an important decision that we'll have to make that will affect all of us, and really want to make sure we get everybody's thoughts, opinions, and just thinking through these items. So thank you, Chair.
Chair Gallardo, can I add just something quick, which is, as you both just referenced, this took the Strategic Planning Committee a few weeks ago quite a bit of time just to understand the options. And so we weren't really thinking that you're going to sort of say, well, obviously option, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
This morning is about your chance to understand this and ask questions, right? Get comfortable with it. We are planning on bringing the discussion to the full board in 10 days. In September, but as Chair Saragos just mentioned, we would like to get your direction in October. So this is your chance to kind of understand this. There's, we're throwing out a lot of terms, APS, SES, risks on both paths. So this is your chance to ask away.
Thank you. And I think Vice Chair Dowden-Cotterville had the first questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate your bringing this to us. So just wondering, has staff formulated a recommendation? Are you truly just not, are you throwing it to us, or have you thought about this, or you're choosing not to weigh in, or just kind of curious? And it can be you choosing not to weigh in because you want us to, that's fine, if that's the answer.
So I think initially for a while, we have been thinking and kind of under the assumption that we will just run another bill because we have to take the sunset as you heard Politico Group just describe. right? So we would just obviously run a bill to sort of clean that up and to push the bill back to our schedule back to 29. And I think the more recent conversation that we've been having, if I can try to sort of boil it down, is do we want to spend a lot of time and effort next year, and you never know what you're going to get 2 more years, as you have now understood deep into the blueprint this year, right? The next cycle out under the current framework, we think is going to be pretty tough. And that means we would be cut off from SB1 funds. So we want to get 2 more years where we're almost assured of that certainty. Or as Chris mentioned in his mitigating the risks, do we want to actually think a little bit more broadly about, can we actually try to change some of that SB1 funding threat? Because that will take, and we can't really do both. But I think that's the bottom line, is it's going to be hard for us to run both of those.
To do both at the same time. I appreciate that, and thank you very much for vocalizing that. On option 2, do we have any thoughts about partnering with other COGs on this issue, or do we know, clearly one of the concerns would be that other regional agencies might be concerned, so have we, not that we've had any discussions by any means, but just sort of your feelings on that, if there would be someone else that would be willing to take on this
I think
challenge?
we would have to partner on both of those options, right? So if you think of option 1 as we're going to try to sort of mitigate the risk through some of the SB1, we won't do that alone.
Mhm.
And then I think and Chris and Kiana, please weigh in here, and we got our other team in the back as well. But even for option 2, I think and maybe you can reiterate what you were saying earlier. It's very hard for us, right? Think Green Means Go, think AB 350. It's very hard for us still as a region to drive something ourselves. We need to work in a coalition and in partnership.
That's what I mean, though. I just wonder, have we thought about which COGs, or have we thought about if we
Sure.
wanted to pursue option 2, which other entities might be good to partner with? Have we, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think on that one, it's our strong belief that there will be legislation next year that attempts to statewide say that the SCS needs to be much more driven by the housing planning requirements, right? That is a pretty clear implication of the recommendations that HCD put forward. And it's sort of at the heart of at least one bill that we saw in the current 2-year session, which did not move forward because of concerns about how do we meet our federal air quality conformity requirements under these really strict requirements of AB 1335. AB 1335 basically, to drastically oversimplify it, said that your SCS and your regional transportation plan need to assume that all of the units that are in the 8-year RENA cycle will be produced in that time period. We all know that that's a really, it's not not the purpose of RENA, B, not the track record of RENA. We fund about 20% of the below market housing that's called for in RENA, right? That we would need to just dramatically expand both the capacity for production and the funding if we were going to hit those targets.
Which is out of our control.
So it's basically it was basically saying we're going to codify this really unreasonable assumption. And then the COGs were thinking through, well, what does that mean for how we model emissions under our plans, right? So there's just with this like ascendant housing sort of focus in the legislature, and frankly, some of these small groups that have never run statewide legislation, Abundant Housing LA was the sponsor of that. I don't think they ran any bills until last session, and they're being taken really seriously, right? So that's just we think that conversation's coming back whether we want to or not. And so to think about a SACOG bill that sort of concedes ground on that issue, while we know COGs statewide are concerned about making really significant planning changes, that's a really complicated political balance, right? It gives credence to the idea that the housing should drive the SCS, right? What are the concerns? That's the hard question.
Vice Chair, I know we, and for everybody, we talk a lot about the mega region group and our MOU with the Bay Area and San Joaquin County, but I do want to also offer up. We have a very close partnership with the largest 4 MPOs in the state. So MTC in the Bay Area, SCAG in Southern California, and SANDAG in San Diego. That represents, the 4 of us represent about 80% of the state's population. So, and then we have CalCog, which is the association of all the COGs. So you have a, you have an infrastructure there. That's the good news, right? Where
Yep.
we are in constant communication and a very close partnership on this.
Do you think that they would be willing to partner with us on something
I
like
think
this?
the conversation, especially around the SB1 piece, the funding, right? Because if you think about it, what if all 4 of those largest MPOs all went out of compliance at the same time?
Mm.
Are we all going to
That's my
get cut off
point.
from state
Yeah,
funding?
that's not going to happen.
So I think there's an
Cubs will be
interest.
very happy. when it gets to happen.
I think, I do think though, it's kind of like our mantra on Green Means Go. Okay, state of California, right? We understand there's a housing crisis. We understand there's a climate crisis. Give us what you're trying to accomplish, but let us figure out how to accomplish this rather than,
What a concept.
so, but that's really, I mean, that is really, I think, the operating principle of Green Means Go, right? We said, okay, we hear you, but let us figure it out on our terms. So I think we're going to have to double down on that approach for something like SB1, right? So,
And then the last question is just kind of getting out even further. Any thoughts on the administration and where they might come out? Should there be legislation? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think the main reason that we think 2 is more feasible than 3 is
yeah,
it
3 is off the. I would
aligns
just take that
with-
Off the table.
it is a way to do a test run of a core recommendation in that California Housing Futures 2040 report, right? So, and that is something that was not out when we were doing AB 350, right? So I think that's the way to, sell that to the administration. Is like, look, you have this recommendation. Here's a way we could make it real in this region. We'll see how it works.
With respect to option 1, I will just observe that it's Chris and I's experience, having worked directly on SB1, that the APS requirement was removed by the Brown administration very intentionally, right? There are alternative opinions to that, but that is our perspective and experience on that. We do have a new administration. It is quite different to put something into statute 7 years ago, the concept of which could happen in the future, and very much a different story when 1 or more regions are out of compliance and unable to access state dollars that are being paid by your residents at the pump
Course
every
correct
day.
is not, course correction is not unreasonable by any means.
Yes.
After 7 years.
That being said, it was done under a previous administration. We don't have many members in the legislature left that did vote on SB1, right? So it would take some education and conversations with the Newsom administration. I think there is it is my perspective right now that there is potential for that pathway, though.
Okay, good.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And I know you mentioned about option 3. I think safe to say that with our strategic planning group, it said the same thing.
Yeah.
Not realistic, but we needed to make sure to bring it to
Yeah.
all the options to everybody to get their input in. And I think you hit on it, was my thought too. The other regions, this has to be a joint voice to
Yeah.
say,
It would have to be.
we
really,
all
I
have
mean,
the same goal, help us make this happen.
mhm.
Yeah. Chair Sargosen.
Yeah, thank you. I do think the conversation, my opinion, does have to center around SB1. I think within the contours of SB1, I think if we move it into SB 375 territory, I think we hit lots of landmines in terms of undermining environmental standards. And so I think if you can keep it into an SB1 conversation, at least, whatever path we choose, I think it's at least from a PR side of things, it's a better place to go from. Chris or Kiana, on what HCD had sort of put out there a little bit, in terms of maybe looking at having housing be more of the driver, did CARB or any other EPA come up with, did they have any response to that? Was there ever, to have that sort of cross jurisdictional conversationals? Since we know there's some inherent conflict sometimes between those two things. I'm just wondering if there was any type of, anything that was telegraphed by that. And of course, we'll have to have those conversations going forward. but-
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I'm not aware of any sort of formal consultation that happened on that report. It was not explicitly required in the trailer bill that led to the report, but I wouldn't be surprised if there had been some interagency collaboration, particularly with the ongoing, CGC, CARB, HCD, joint meetings. But that's something we can do some research on. I think my perspective from having engaged on AB 1335 is that I think the concerns would probably be much more from the transportation side and the implications for conformity and SB1 eligibility. But it's a good flag to anything in this area, you got to think about the housing, the transportation, and the carbon greenhouse gas emissions. So complicated stuff.
Any other questions? Anyone solve this and has the perfect answer? I know. There you go. Well,
Rock, paper, scissors?
it's just great opportunity to go through this again. And I think I feel like we spent so much time, but I also feel like I got a little more answers today. So I appreciate Kristen County in particular. If no other questions here, I will open up for public if we have any public comment on this item.
There's no public comment on this item.
All right, thank you.
Is the strategic planning session recorded online that you guys, is that one that's recorded?
We didn't record that one. That was the strategic planning committee is the board chair, vice chair, committee chairs, former board chairs. So we had that August 26th, but we certainly have notes and we can share some of those.
That would be good, maybe in the staff packet for the next
Yeah,
meeting,
sure.
to have that,
Yep.
to help.
If
Yeah,
it
I
was that
think-
close between the conversations, I just would like to hear or read.
I think but I will say, I think you echoed, maybe in a shorter version, you echoed a little bit of, so as Chair Saragosa and Committee Chair Gallardo just said, there really was not oh, well, this is kind of obvious what we should do. It was really more a kick the tires, let's understand the options. We went into the weeds a little bit more than this morning in terms of a timeline and a schedule. And we could certainly share those. Staff's put together kind of great calendars just so you can kind of understand the 2027, 29, 31, the next RENA cycle and how that influences things. So we'll put our heads together and give you a summary of
I
that.
think that would be really beneficial for the full board because,
Sure.
we've heard this, your strategic planning committee has
Yep.
heard this, but when you're bringing it to the full board, I think that
Yeah.
members would really benefit. I would benefit, even though I heard today. So I think I would really highly recommend that you do that.
Yeah, and if we could make the same ask, I think as Chair Gallardo was starting with the full board on the 19th of September, if we would really and appreciate you all just kind of weighing in and saying, hey, here was
Absolutely.
our discussion, the policy committee, we asked for some more information, here it is, just so we do open this up, because I think as we started this off by saying, we understand it'll take you like a little time to get your heads around this, but we do want your direction in October so that we can get and hit the ground running and have Chris and Kiana help.
Yeah,
I can appreciate, that from staff's perspective, it's tough to think, okay, we've got to try to work on a fix that we may not be able to achieve while still working to meeting the current requirements of that 2-year. And I appreciate that. That's tricky because you don't know for sure if you're going to make a legislative fix. So you have to kind of do both things congruently. And you only have so many people that can work on these things. So
That said, I do think if you recall, this board had a very good discussion on AB 350. And it sort of gave us direction and took a little while, took a couple of months. And we, I think, teed up at that point to you, look, it's kind of, we have to go one way or the other here. We can mitigate risk, but actually hedging bets is harder. And we made the decision at that point, we will run a bill And we will try to push the timeline back, but we are going to take the time on the long-range plan, the blueprint. We're just going to do that. That is the decision we're going to make. That was incredibly helpful for our staff and our team to set that up. And yes, if we hadn't gotten AB 350 signed, we would have probably been into an APS and out of compliance early. We wouldn't have been eligible for this round of SB1 grants. But the decision that was made, the direction you gave us, and the certainty really, really helped. So I think that's the.
Well, then it's on the board. It's our response. We have to be accountable. So, right?
Well, I think for our full director meeting, it will be really helpful to have this committee give that input between strategic planning and this committee, because it's such a deep dive and there's risk both directions. And so we're going to try but I think too, even just we've learned just even in a short couple of weeks, a little bit more about what we think those will be. So Kristen, Kiana, thank you so much. It's very appreciated what you did. And like I say, I think I'm learning a little more each time and feeling a little more confident about my thoughts. So thank you very much.
I don't want us to be afraid of risk, though.
That's
too.
right.
I mean, that's kind of what legislation is
Well,
always, regardless.
Well, and
There's
that's
always
where
risk.
joining with others gives us
That's exactly
that,
right, because there's power in numbers. So, but I just, so I know we're gonna have another meeting to talk about that more, so.
And I'll just, I mean, for myself, any directors, you want to call me or whatever, you want to talk more about it, I'm happy to make myself available, give you my perspective is at least, just if you want to dig in a little bit more, I'll make myself available, so.
Appreciate that. Well, thank you very much. And this is just an information item. So we're going to move on to our next item, and it's number 8, and it's the recap of our Denver, Colorado Peer Region Tour. And Leah Lopez is going to be leading our conversation.
It was a great trip. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, good morning. It's great to be here. I am really happy and excited to share about our Denver Region Tour that took place in late June. My name is Mia Lopez. I had the pleasure of being your tour guide for this event. And you might be thinking, well, why are we talking about Denver? It happened all the way back in June. It feels like forever ago, but we've been presenting to committees to share about what we learned on the tour and also give our members an opportunity to provide some insights about what they learned on the tour and what you found, and we'll bring back to SACOG and your cities and counties. So what is a peer region tour? Peer regions are similar in economy, size, and population. These tours are a great opportunity to learn from leaders, explore projects that are similar to things happening in our region. We learned that the Denver region is facing some challenges we see here, things like congestion, greenhouse gas emissions concerns, housing affordability and availability, transportation funding. They also have similar challenges when it comes to balancing the needs of urban and rural communities. The city of Denver is also the capital of Colorado, and it has most of the population of the state in that region. During our time, we got to see a ton of projects in the works. One of them are up Belmar at the city of Lakewood. This was an infill development project that replaces a 100-acre 1960s mall that started to lose its charm over time. Now it's a great walkable community with townhomes, apartments, entertainment, and restaurants. This might sound familiar, as it was great to envision the future for what Sunrise Mall and Citrus Heights might look like one day. We also explored Central Park community. Oh, I'm going too fast. There we go. Formerly known as Stapleton, Central Park is the largest infill project in the country, one of the largest. It took up 7.5 miles of what used to be an airport. Now it's a bustling community with housing and services. We got to learn about the project, how it unfolded over time, and went on a walking tour through the neighborhood. So you can see our group walking through there. We also went to Loretto Heights, which is a 72-acre project that has had many lives. It used to be the home of Sisters of Loretto, later served as a college campus. Now it's a beautiful, this beautiful historic building is being transformed into a mixed-use cultural hub. We got to tour the grounds, went inside this really cool building. It was fascinating to imagine what the campus will be in just a few years. So it was very awesome. We also explored some transportation projects in the region. We went to the Denver Department of Transportation to learn about how the state is implementing tolling. We also discussed how they've been managing toll lanes, managing community feedback, tolling equity programs in their community. And we also heard about bus rapid transit projects that they have unfolding over the next decade or so. And we got to drive down Colfax Avenue in the Denver area to envision what this BRT line will look like in the future. So it was very informational. It was great to hear from the leaders putting on these projects and also getting to see them in person and experience them. And, you know, exploring with all of you, our board members, city and county staff, and also partners and developers who play an important role in building the future of the region. So I'd love to open it up now to see if any board members here today who attended the tour with us, if there's anything that you'd like to share about what you learned and saw and took away from this experience.
You
Would like to
Sure.
start us off?
So this was my first study mission with SACOG, and I really appreciated the level of detail. I particularly am always interested in what we can do with our historic buildings, and so I really, really appreciated that element. The Loretto building, and then also the old fabric facility that's been turned into multi-businesses. It was a rag. What- Yeah, that was, you know, and then with the potential with the electrical companies building, and just that whole riverfront area was very, very interesting, but appreciated that. Noticed there was so much walkability with that around the multifamily homes, and just a lot of multifamily development, more than, you know, coming from Auburn, I'm Placerville, same thing. Well, Rockland, you guys have more population, but you know, we don't have that. So it was interesting to see that. But I really, again, I just have a soft spot for history. So but it was great. Really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Liked meeting with the mayor. You
Oh,
know,
he was
very
amazing.
forward thinking,
Yeah.
and interesting too, when he talked about homelessness, that was very interesting. And then I noted that, of course, the city is a city county, you know, Denver is its own city county situation. And so that mayor yields a lot of power, just like San Francisco, where they can control those funds and make those changes without having to really secure votes like we all have to do here. So, but it was great.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the trip. I was particularly interested in visiting the Belmar redevelopment. I actually went back there August 21st and 22nd to look again. This time unescorted with my wife and daughter. Walked around Belmar development, kind of looked at a few things that were that very thought provoking. So as much as things are very different in Colorado versus California, we can see certainly draw some similarities. I did do a presentation to our council, the last council meeting, and I've encouraged them to do our separate trip back there and really sort of dive into what are the details there. Certainly, there's lots of questions we have as far as financing
And no CEQA.
well, see, but that's what we have to deal with. It's okay. That's the game, that's the field we're playing on. That includes CEQA and some of that. And the other thing that they don't necessarily have is prevailing wage. And a lot of the developers said, well, there's a lot of projects we couldn't have done if we had to deal with prevailing wage. But this is the playing field we're on in California, and this is something we have to sort of embrace and understand how we're going to focus on that. So I enjoyed the entire trip, looking at the historical buildings of Loretto, and I was just amazed at the steam plant and how they generated steam to heat the buildings in Denver, which is something fairly unique. And I hadn't been sort of really explored that kind of depth when we started talking about trying to heat facilities during the wintertime. And so they get lots of snow and ice there. Not lots of snow, but lots of cold weather and ice and wind, things like that. So anyhow, I very much appreciated that I went. I was really on the fence on going, to be honest. It was, thanks James for really encouraging that. Overall, it was a very worthwhile. Again, I've gone back on my own dime, and hopefully we will go back as a council and really kind of get in with the folks at Lakewood and see what what kind of similarities we can sort of gain. What's the model? What model can we follow? Maybe it's a model we can, maybe we can't. We'll see. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you need any connections with City of Lakewood, the folks there who gave us the tour would be happy to introduce.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to say, we're happy to help that council tour and that, anybody else. And just, I wanted to really appreciate you actually going back to your council and making a presentation on this. Obviously, the follow-up, and we know this has a lot of resonance, right? It's almost exactly the same acreage as Sunrise Mall. But yeah, I mean, this is exactly, I think, what we're hoping these tours will spark, right? Is like some updates to your council and your peers and, here's what we saw. Nothing is ever completely transferable, right? There is no perfect lesson. There is no true success story without failures, but there's things that can inspire.
One other comment so the city of Lakewood is much bigger than Citrus Heights. They're about double our population. So what I did was I compared zip code to zip code. So 95610 versus the zip code around the Belmar Mall. Demographically, very, very similar. Similar in the cost of homes, our median income. Our rent is actually $10 a month on average, less than theirs is, which surprised me. But from a demographic standpoint, from just a general community comparison, we just compared the two zip codes. They were very, very similar, which is certainly something that's really important. Lots of people have said, well, we could look at the Palladio in Folsom. They have a different demographic than Folsom does. That's not really comparable. We could look at Florin Mall. Lots of people said, hey, let's look at the Santana Road down in San Jose. Oh my gosh, that's a very different demographic, very different, completely different community in San Jose. So certainly it was again, a valued experience. So thank you.
Yeah, I was just happy that, because we do these, 1 year on, 1 year off. So I was happy that I got as chair this year that I got a trip. Darren will get a retreat, which, is fun, but not as cool. So yeah, but we'll bond. We'll all bond, which we did on this too. And that's the other part I love about these is that we do get a chance to bond and get to know each other a little bit better. Especially, in those COVID years where we didn't get a chance to do anything but see each other in little squares on TV or on our computer screens. So that part I love as well. And I really want to thank staff because, you all did an absolutely amazing job of, bringing a lot of great projects to put in front of us, as well as making sure everything ran completely on time. Even when all of us were sort of bad students and wandered off and you all had to come find us and like first graders, it's like, oh, where did Michael go? He wandered off again. So thank you, for all that. And I'm so happy, Director Schaefer, I'm glad you're able to come because this was one where you were the sort of first one. I knew this project was on there, like, okay, this could be a potentially, a good contrast, and knowing that the demographics were that close, is a great thing. But for all of us, because, as I've mentioned many times, housing is near and dear to my heart, and I really wanted to see what other people were doing, other best practices. Also knowing that, CEQA, prevailing wage, there's other things that are that other people don't have to deal with, but still looking at what those opportunities are. I did, and I'll have to dig a little bit deeper into this, and I was going to ask staff to do this as well, as, some of their finance mechanisms that they had in Colorado, were there any applicability to California? I don't know if some of it was more like Melrose type of financing for some things, but just wanted to get a better understanding because, they were able to do to bring some things to bear, I think, because of that financing mechanisms that I wasn't aware that we could do here in California. But if there were any similarities or if it needed legislation or different things, certainly things I'd want to look more into to try to help all of ourselves as we look at how to, deal with our housing and, state goals and other things where not all that easy to conform sometimes to those requests or to those mandates, excuse me. So So all that, I think that's one thing where I'd be interested to hear if anyone else had, any other thoughts on the financing side as well. And then from my perspective and just going forward did everyone feel like, it was worth it? Like, did you get out of it, would you want to do other trips to other locations, or, is it better that we do retreats or just, not have that, investment? So, was just wanting to hear what the group thought as well. Thank you.
I had a comment.
Yes, please.
So as a new board member, I really enjoyed having the opportunity to connect with my fellow board members. It was very fascinating to hear about some of the challenges that we have, some similar, some not. I was particularly interested in learning more about the applicability of the finance strategies for the low-income housing. I mean, some of the things that they were talking about, leasing from the state, I believe. So that's something that I think is important that we always look at. I do think this is a worthwhile investment. We get to go beyond our day-to-day, learn something new, and also, again, just to continue to meet each other. I mean, in theory, we're here, we should be meeting, but as we all know, things and their responsibilities get in place. So I would encourage us to continue to do it.
That's great.
Thank you.
I didn't get to attend. Sorry, I would have liked to have, but I do believe in these kinds of trips. I did go on the one at Cap to Cap, and I think that that's very helpful for all of us to get together and see these things and bring a different perspective. So I would be in support of these kinds of trips.
Thank you. I will tell you, I've had an opportunity to do a couple now. I think it's one of the most beneficial things that we've done. I go back to the first time when it was after Cap to Cap and we were in DC and we went to look at the neighborhoods. It's the first time I was able, and clearly I'm a visual learner, but to see the beautiful single-family home with those Paseo homes and then with multifamily in that community. And I felt like if somebody saw that, that would alleviate the fear factor to see how cool it was. And remember all the kids walking to school because everything was walkable there, which, we don't see as often. I thought that was fabulous. When Salt Lake really stuck out to me with their transit. I mean, that was impressive that what they've been able to do. And I think with Denver, the thing that jumped out to me the most was clearly it is the city county, but the reduction in homeless, his numbers, I can't remember what he said. I'm like, and so fast. It's like, holy moly, how did they
Power of
do
the
that?
gavel, because he.
Yeah, he
controls.
just made it happen. I thought that really stuck out to me. And the same thing too. I love that walkability. I kept thinking the whole time, because as a kid, going to Sunrise Mall was a big deal for us. And I was there last week, went to the Macy's. It's a little spooky when you got to walk in and it's pretty empty to get to the store, but I was supporting. But yes, I ordered online and picked up at Sunrise. So there you go. But I would kept thinking, perfect for what you're trying to do. And so I think I love that you guys are able to find these kind of places that really resonate with what we're doing. I know it's a lot to give up our personal time to go but I really think it's been incredibly valuable because I took something from each of those that I think I can work with as we're trying to rebuild our downtown, and ours unfortunately burned down a time or two, and so we're trying to get that identity back. Like I love to come to your downtown, you have that. I think it's exceptionally beneficial. So thank you so much for what you did to make it happen. And I would like to see us continue them. Yeah. Even give one to Darren. I think we should.
And the party bus.
And Carm has to always come as well. I mean,
That's right,
if Carm's not on it, then we have to rethink it,
We have to have Carm.
Yeah. But and as you pointed out, just the benefit of us connecting. We all come from such different jurisdictions, and so much of what we do is supporting someone else's. It really helps to have that commitment. And I think that the same goes with as we're coming to visit our different jurisdictions. I think that's really helpful for people to be able to see, would I have been in Yuba City? Probably not if we hadn't have done something like this. So it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any public comment on this?
There's no public comment on this item.
All right, well, thank you. Well, then we're going to move on. Our next item is receive and file. I don't know if anybody has any input on those.
I was hoping that Chair Galdo, Erica Johnson, just give you a quick overview of your receive and file item, because I know it generated some interest actually when we were back in Woodland and we talked about the budget and some of the amendments to the budget for FY '24. So in terms of the closeout, if Eric could just touch on it.
Sure, happy to do that. So yeah, today is really just kind of a preview of what you're going to hear about next month from Loretta Sue, giving you a 5-year forecast of our budget. But a couple things I wanted to point out and kind of give you some context for what you see in the attachment on how we close the year. We typically come to you all really focusing on our single year budget, right? And because of the type of funding that SACOG receives, by necessity, we really have to be conservative in our budgeting. So when we came to you early in 2023 to look at this this year that just ended, we asked you to spend about $900,000 in reserves. However, as you'll see in the attachment, we actually ended up returning about $400,000 to reserves. And that's a result of some grants we've received, as well as kind of how we manage things through the year and keeping positions open and things like that. So it's a good news story on that front. The other thing you'll notice, and this is a relatively new thing for SACOG, to have this large of a budget and this large of a balance is typically the transportation funds we receive. Those don't actually hit our financials, but we direct Caltrans to give those grants directly to cities and counties and others. Here, with the Green Means Go grants and other state grants we've received recently, those came to SACOG. And as you heard earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty about what was happening with the state budget. And so we and jurisdictions all sat on that. And so most of that money's moving forward into the fiscal year that we just started. And so that's why you'll see total expenditures just over a little under 60%. So as I mentioned, next year we'll come back, give you a little bit of a preview of what we can anticipate over the next 5 years. But again, I'll just highlight there's a lot due to the grant funding that we receive that is uncertain. But we want to kind of understand how does that kind of money that flows through us, is that separate from the overall ongoing staff that you heard about, our staff of about 60 and the ongoing funding that we can rely on, and then what's variable. So happy to answer any questions, but we'll definitely be spending some time on that next month.
Any questions,
I
Brad?
think you got clarity on, wrapping up the fiscal year, right? And we typically start every budget and every budget process, as Eric said, looking at digging into reserves, and then we work really hard through the year to figure out how we fund the work and get grants and other things. So good news to close out the fiscal year. But I will also tell you, and Eric did a nice job of previewing this, when you look at the 5-year, it's going to be the first time we've done really
That's right.
a longer term multi-year sort of budgeting exercise. You're just so you don't get too worried, you're going to see a couple of years of certainty where we're looking pretty good. And then I think we're going to show you, we don't know what happens in years 3, 4, and 5. And so that's going to look like a big fiscal cliff. It is a fiscal cliff that is, solvable, right? But so we're trying something we haven't tried with you before, because we want to try to get ahead and then actually understand certain lines of work need grant funding, right? And so what can we do to anticipate that, and things like Green Means Go. And so anyway, I'm sure you'll have questions when we look at the 5-year look ahead. But I wanted to just give you the good news on the closeout and prep and for what's coming to you on the multi-year forecast.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. We will then open this up for other matters. If anybody has any other matters, questions. Oh, yes.
My announcement, I remember to bring a thing. It's Colfax Railroad Days this weekend. So you can come up both Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 5. And there are 6 model train exhibits, free train rides all through the area. I have a free kids zone with lots of games and crafts and stuff for them to do. 75 something vendors between food and crafts. And I think the theater's playing movies as well, so there's a little bit of something for everybody, so.
I love that theater.
you
I
go.
haven't been there for a while.
You've never come to it?
I've been to the theater before for, but
Yeah.
I've been to, definitely, I love it.
Yeah.
I used to watch
fabulous.
movies at that theater.
Me too. I always, that was always such a good
Yeah,
place.
so, and then of course we have the gunslingers that come out, the Black Flagging, they hold up the trains and do all kinds of fun stuff that the kids absolutely adore. And the Mormon encampment comes, they have a Mormon battalion, it's about an 1840s pioneer camp, and they shoot off the cannon to start the event. And then we also do a POW MIA ceremony right in the beginning as well for the remembrance.
It's a lot
on
of
that.
fun.
There's lots of things going on, so I remember to bring a
And
whole
the weather
choir.
will be perfect for us.
Yes, it is. I'm so excited. I checked it this morning, so
Yeah.
it'll be perfect.
We have the Sacramento Aloha. It was so funny. We have the Sacramento Aloha Festival in Auburn at our fairgrounds this weekend, and I think it starts at 10 a.m. and it's a lot of fun. So all things Hawaiian culture and then the Pacific as well. So that's happening at the
Nothing
fairgrounds.
says Hawaiian like Auburn.
I
right?
know
Absolutely.
I don't know why. I mean, it's great. They're Sacramento based and they come to Auburn. We're happy to have them, and it's actually pretty fun. I spoke last year and did a VIP tent. I'm like, oh.
We have a state of the town for Loomis on the 25th of September, and it's in the evening at the Blue Goose. Our mayor requested it be in the evening, and so
Okay.
5:30 to 7:30, 7:30.
Yeah.
So
What date is that?
it's a Wednesday, the 25th.
September 25th.
Just say, I'm looking forward to welcoming everybody to Placerville for our next board meeting. So hopefully everybody can make it. Wendy and I are looking forward to hosting everybody. I already, we won't have the really cool video that, that we had before. We don't have the ability to do that, but we'll have a good time. We'll, looking forward to taking you up to Apple Hill and doing a couple of other things, some projects that are going on in Placerville. So looking forward to that. And then I know Lynette sent an email around as well. Wendy and I are gonna we're gonna do a lunch afterwards. So if anyone wants to join us for lunch at the Independent in Placerville, let her know. And then 'cause I'm trying to make sure we have an RSVP list put together for that as well. So looking forward to seeing everybody.
And then on the front end of that, at 8 a.m.
8 a.m. Yes.
I know that's early for many of you that are coming from a little further, but there will be a bus tour that Michael and Wendy and our local hosts in Placerville are arranging, just to see some of the really cool stuff that's happening up in Placerville and El Dorado County. So please do mark your calendars and
I wish I could do lunch, but I have Pioneer that day.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I always, as chair, I meet with the CEO.
Understandable.
before, But
You get it. Yes.
I'll
You get
cut
dispensation.
rain- Yeah, get a rain check for lunch. I'm gonna be there for the meeting, but I
Definitely.
We just have to eat fast, so our frozen pies we're gonna pick up. will
That's
be
true.
okay.
I know exactly. We'll storm away like in City
Right.
Hall or something.
That's right. We're looking forward to it.
Thank
Do you have
you.
anything new and exciting about? Well, I can tell you in Rockland, one of the coolest things that came out of COVID, believe it or not, something did. We always have a hot chili cool cars events that we
Oh,
shut down part of Rockland Road and Pacific Street and have a very large car show and a chili cook-off. And it's coming up on the 21st. But during COVID, when we couldn't do it, all those car specialists were like, we want to do something. So we did a parade through town the night before. And it was so popular that now we do Friday night a parade through town, and it's just awesome. We just try to hit every street we possibly can. There's no great, parade route, and so everybody from the houses can come out and wave. So encourage you to, a hot chili cola cars is always fun. Our Rodney Atkins, the country singer, will be here on the 14th if you have not been to a concert at Coy Park, please call me and tell me when you have one you're interested in coming, because I am a music fiend and I am completely biased. It is the
You are.
coolest. It's true. It is the coolest venue. It's
It
just
is.
beautiful. We had Judy Collins this last week, Macy Gray's coming up, Three Dog Night. So there's not a bad seat. You bring a lawn chair and it's just perfect.
pretty
So,
neat.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. So looking forward to that. I think that's all we've got. I know.
September and October.
I know. Well, thank you, everyone. And with that, then we will adjourn our committee. Our next meeting is Monday, October the 7th, same place, same time. Look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much. We're adjourned.